I never thought much about the overnight shifts at the self-storage facility, not until the night I heard someone whisper my name from inside a locked unit. It was supposed to be an easy job, a way to pay off debt without dealing with customers or supervisors breathing down my neck. The place sits just outside the city limits, a lonely grid of corrugated metal buildings, with peeling blue paint and dented roll-up doors. At night, the floodlights flicker on, chasing away the worst of the shadows, but not all of them. My only company is the constant low hum of the security monitors and the occasional mouse that skitters under my chair. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 10:58, 2 minutes early, just to show the system I cared. The previous guy, Jeff, left without a word, typical. Outside, wind rattled the chain-link fence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and somewhere, a loose gutter tapped against metal with every gust. By midnight, the monotony had settled in. I made my first round, flashlight beams slicing through the aisles. The night air had a sharp chemical edge, like cold plastic and ozone. I stopped at Unit 112, which always smelled faintly of mothballs and something sour. The lock was fine. Nothing out of place. I moved on. I always try to keep things normal. Check the locks, log the times, sip too hot coffee from a chipped mug. But after the second round, 1:42 a.m., I heard a soft, rhythmic thumping from somewhere down the northern row. Not loud, but definitely there. I paused, listening. It stopped, then started again. A slow beat echoing off the metal walls, like someone drumming their fingers. I told myself it was probably a rat, maybe a branch blown loose. Still, my skin prickled. I followed the sound. The rows all looked the same at night. Endless doors stretching away in both directions, each one exactly like the next. I kept my flashlight low, not wanting to advertise myself. The thumping got louder as I passed Unit 107, then stopped abruptly at 109. I stood there, feeling exposed. I waited, holding my breath. But the only thing I heard was my own pulse and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. Nothing moved. I bent down, looking for any sign of trouble, footprints maybe, or a loose lock. The gravel was undisturbed. I rattled the handle just to be sure. Locked tight. I told myself I'd log it as a false alarm and double-check on my next round. Back in the office, I tried to steady my hands enough to type the note in the log. The glow from the monitors made the shadows seem deeper. Around 2:15, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. That's when it happened the second time, a voice, faint, just outside the office door. It said my name. Not a shout or a scream, just a flat conversational, Ellie. Like someone I knew was waiting out there. The sound was wrong though. Too soft, as if it had been said right behind me and then bounced into my ears after. I froze, mug halfway to my lips, staring at the warped window in the office door. The security lights outside made it impossible to see anything clearly, only my own pale reflection. My mouth felt dry. I listened for footsteps, for breathing, anything to prove I wasn't alone. Of course, I had to check. I grabbed the heavy flashlight again, letting the door creak open just enough to peer outside. The gravel crunched under my boots. There was nobody there. The wind was dead still now, and the only motion was a damp scrap of paper pressed flat against the fence. I swept the beam around. Empty aisles, locked doors, shadows pooled under the eaves. I stepped out fully, not wanting to let my imagination fill in the blanks the darkness left behind. The smell out here seemed sharper, metallic, and the silence pressed in tight, like being underwater. I stood there, holding my breath, scanning for any hint of movement. The paper by the fence fluttered once, then stilled. Something in me wanted to call out, to bark some warning, or just to hear my own voice, but I kept quiet. I remembered the way the voice had sounded, not urgent, not lost, just expectant, as if it had reason to believe I'd answer. I waited a minute, maybe two, forcing myself to count. When nothing happened, I tried to laugh at it, muttering that I'd been reading too many stories online. Still, I double-checked every latch and lock from the office to the outer gate, just to be sure. I even recorded a short voicemail to myself, so I'd have proof later that my mind was still sharp. The sound of my own voice comforted me a little, until I played it back and realized that, somewhere in the background, there was a faint, wet sound I couldn't quite place, like someone dragging a hand across the metal siding. By 2:30, I was back in the office. I watched the grainy monitors, their black and white images stuttering with each flicker of the security lights. There was nothing but empty corridors and locked doors. I watched myself on the feed, standing alone by the office, flashlight cutting through the dark. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the far corner of the screen. A shape, maybe, or just a trick of the monitor. When I looked up, the lot was still empty. I tried to write it all down in the log, stick to facts, keep it boring. Heard noise near 109, checked, all secure, possible wind. I left out the voice. I left out the feeling that the lot itself was leaning in, listening. I made coffee, letting the familiar hiss and sputter steady my nerves. The office smelled of burnt plastic and cold dust, but that was almost comforting. I kept the door locked this time. Still, every time I glanced at the window, I expected to see a face pressed against it, or a shadow that didn't belong. At 3:04 a.m., the lights in the northern row flickered and went out, plunging that whole stretch into black. The rest of the lot glowed as usual, but those units, 106 through 113, looked like teeth in a broken jaw, swallowed by shadow. I tried the breaker, but nothing changed. The monitors showed only static for that row. I told myself it was a wiring issue, the same problems we'd had last winter. Still, I waited a few minutes, hoping the floodlights would reset. They didn't. I finally grabbed my jacket and the heavy mag light and forced myself outside again. The air had changed, colder, somehow, and damp, like the whole place had taken a breath. My boots felt too loud on the gravel. The silence was total, except for the soft tick of cooling metal somewhere nearby. As I approached the darkened row, my skin crawled. The shadows were thick, swallowing the beam of my flashlight after a few feet. It made everything look smaller. The doors pressed too close together, the aisles narrowing in around me. I reached Unit 109 and stopped. The padlock was there, hanging just as I'd left it, but the door itself was bowed out at the bottom, warped like something had pushed against it from inside. I crouched, shining my light along the seam. There, in the thin line where the door didn't quite meet the frame, was a smear of something dark, sticky, and glistening. It looked black in the flashlight's beam, almost oily. I stared at it, not wanting to reach out but unable to look away. Every instinct screamed at me to back off, to go call someone, but the urge to make sense of it overruled everything else. I touched the edge with my finger, thinking maybe it was just grease from the door track, but it clung to my skin, thick and cold. It smelled wrong, too, sour and coppery, like old coins left in water. The padlock was still firm, but I shook it anyway, as if expecting it to fall open. The door groaned softly with the motion, and I heard a faint, rhythmic sound from inside, like breathing, but not quite. It was too slow, too regular, a rise and fall against the metal, as if the unit itself was exhaling. A prickling ran up my arms. I staggered back, wiping my hand on my jeans, but the smear just got stickier, refusing to come off. I tried not to imagine what could make a smear like that, what could push so hard from the inside to bow the steel. I backed away, flashlight trembling in my hand, and nearly tripped over a discarded bit of rebar half buried in gravel. The clang echoed through the row, and the breathing sound from inside the unit stopped. At that moment, the wind rose up out of nowhere, scattering loose gravel in a sudden, sharp gust. The silence that followed was impossibly deep, like the whole facility had gone underwater again. I turned to hurry back to the office, but my flashlight flickered, its beam pulsing and dimming. I smacked it against my palm, more out of habit than hope, and the light steadied, just in time to sweep over a shape at the far end of the row. It was small, pale, and crouched low, just inside the spill of darkness where the floodlights failed. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a stray animal. A cat, maybe, or a raccoon. But the shape was wrong. It was too still, too symmetrical. I blinked, and it was gone. The flashlight caught nothing but the scuffed blue doors and a patch of weeds. I told myself I was seeing things, that the adrenaline was making me jumpy. Still, I didn't turn my back on that empty space until I'd made it all the way to the corner and rounded back toward the office. Inside, I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and scrubbed at my hand in the tiny sink. The sticky stuff clung stubbornly, leaving a faint discoloration on my palm. I kept glancing at the monitors, but the north row was still just static, lines crawling like ants across the screen. In the other feeds, the lot was empty, the other rows frozen in pale, silent stillness. I told myself again to call someone, but who? The cops would laugh at a stuck lock and a weird smear, and the owner was on vacation, unreachable until Monday. I started to text Jeff, the guy who worked before me, just to ask if he'd ever seen anything strange in Unit 109. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to send it. I didn't want to put it into words, not yet. I sat there for a while listening to the quiet, telling myself that if nothing happened for the next 10 minutes, I'd go out and check the breaker again. As the clock ticked toward 3:30, the silence grew thick around me. I could feel it pressing against the windows, heavy and expectant. Then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it again. My name, whispered from outside, right up against the glass. The voice was softer this time, almost pleading. I could not tell the gender, or